I want to catch up with Professor Peter Collignon again from the Australian National University in Canberra. Thanks for joining us, Peter. Always good to get in the next steps in this pandemic. One thing I wondered whether you could share with us any information on is whether quarantine, whether it be across state borders or international borders, whether there might be more effective ways to do it. Is 14 days in isolation the only way? Should we be looking at maybe testing before people leave and another test sometime after they arrive, or are we stuck with this for a long while to come?
Well, I think we're stuck with some sort of quarantine, but we've got to make it proportionate to the risk. Currently, people coming back from the US, Europe, India, for instance, probably a few % of them develop an infection within the first 2 weeks. But even that, whether it needs to be 2 weeks in a hotel or 1 week in a hotel and then 1 week at home, most people probably aren't catching the virus when they're getting on the plane. They've already had it. So most people get diagnosed within a week. So some countries, China, I understand, they quarantine you for a week in a hotel and then a week or 2 weeks at home with some sort of electronic surveillance. And the other issue is not all countries are the same risk. New Zealand, for instance, is no more of a risk than Queensland. So to lock those people up for 2 weeks, and thankfully we're not doing that now, seems a bit pointless. And the same for Taiwan has had no community transmission. And Korea and Japan are much less risky than, for instance, India or the US. So I think we need to look at a tailored approach because we're going to have this problem for another year or two. There's no vaccine that's going to be 90% effective, I think, readily available before the end of next year, if even then. Yet we can't become a hermit nation. So we're going to have to work out some way of doing this that keeps the risk really low. But are there other ways of doing it other than expensive quarantine hotels for 2 weeks for everyone? How about we look at relative risks independently checked by testing people before they come and after they come to check that they really are low-risk countries, but having a varying approach depending what the risk is to us and how best to manage that.
Makes a lot of sense. We should be looking at that now. Governments should be looking at that very, very actively now. Another issue that we're starting to see, you've talked about this a long way back, and that is testing of sewage to see the extent of the virus in any particular community. Sometimes they've found the virus in communities. I'm thinking of Perisher Valley at one stage during the ski season, yet it didn't seem to indicate any outbreak or link to any outbreak. Does this mean that there are... Obviously shows us the virus is out and about, sometimes not manifesting itself in symptoms?
Well, I think you've got to remember that 80% of infections are caused by 20% of people. So there's super spreaders and super spreading events, which is very good. And even if you look at the Ruby Princess, and that, was not optimally handled.
No.
But of 700 people, their immediate infections were only to about 60 or 70 other people, I think. It wasn't, as if it went to thousands of people. So yes, you can excrete the virus, have the virus, and at least not be obviously a big threat to everyone. But the trouble is we can't identify who those people are. So that's why we've got to find everyone and make sure that they don't give it to anybody else as best we can. Sewage testing, I think, is really important. And I'm somewhat surprised that we don't have data for Melbourne readily available. I mean, Melbourne does appear to be having low numbers of cases currently. And my presumption is they'll be able to keep it that way. But one way of really knowing that is to know what the data is from Melbourne, from different regions, this suburb, that suburb. Is it undetectable? Because that'd be reassuring that the tests we've got in people are complemented by something else. And I might say Bathurst over the weekend, they found some in Queensland in different places. I think that's really important because it alerts those people, hey, there may be cases here, go and get tested. And it can concentrate your resources where, in fact, there is a bigger risk. And in Holland, for instance, I saw some data today. They were the first people to do this. They showed it really went down over their summer, but now it's going up again. So it really seems to correlate the level you're finding with how much community transmission is there. And it gives you maybe an early warning, but also gives you reassurance that if you think you've got very few cases or no cases, that there's another confirmatory way of doing that, which is sewage testing, which tests everybody rather than just the people who turn up for the testing centre.
Fascinating stuff. Thanks for joining us again, Peter.
Thank you.